From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson with you, and coming up today, K-State's Dan O'Brien passing along his latest price probability projection for corn based on the USDA's latest numbers, and he'll look at what K-State's enterprise analysis says about the profitability of grain sorghum production in Kansas. Then K-State's Jeff Whitworth will talk about insect activity currently in Kansas wheat, whether you growers should consider controlling it. He'll also tell you alfalfa growers about a useful new tool on K-State's weather data website, which can help in scouting stands for alfalfa weevils. And, of course, on Kansas agricultural weather and the most favorable outlook for rain that we've seen in quite a while, K-State's Mary Knapp. All this and more next on Agriculture Today.
Hamburgers, roast, ribs, steak, or whatever you prefer. Beef, it's what's for dinner. Kansas cattle farmers produce 7.5 million head of cattle per year. It takes about 7 tablespoons of peanut butter to get the same amount of protein in 1 serving of lean beef. Support your local Kansas farmers and ranchers. Eat beef. This message was brought to you by the K-State Animal Sciences Leadership Academy participants.
Thanks for listening in. This is Agriculture Today. Starting off this Friday edition, our weekly grain market segment, where the accent will be largely on the feed grain markets. Dan O'Brien is with us once more via phone, grain market economist, K-State Research and Extension. He's based in Colby, northwest Kansas, as you know. Dan, what you've done here, a couple of things. You've put together your comprehensive corn market outlook, and you've run through some numbers on the returns to grain sorghum production, and we'll get to those in a few moments. But right now, the overview on the corn market, and this is coming off of a pretty favorable week for corn prices.
Well, yes, we have had response in the markets to concerns about crop production issues down in Argentina, and also probably in parts of southern Brazil, although that's not being talked about quite so much now, and kind of latent carryover concerns about second crop corn production in Brazil as well. And again, that's coming in the future more so, again, some late plantings, moisture issues, whatever. So with that, May corn had gotten down, again, right around the 12th. And again, the USDA report happened on January the 12th. The annual summary and WASDE report all came out really pretty bearish. We'd gotten down to about 352 and a half or so for May futures, and here close yesterday, well, had gotten up to 395. The last several days closed about 388.6 and 3/4, something like that. You know, so you're talking about a gain of 30-some cents. That's following on these weather concerns, both really direct weather concerns for the crop in South America, and actually, I think also an awareness of what's happening in our own backyard in terms of dry conditions and concern that could carry over and affect us as we go forward.
And to add to that, corn exports posted a fine week this past week.
Well, that's right. Well, those things are tied together. The concerns in Argentina, and again, not just a little shaving on the side note, really lopping off about 2, 3, 4 million metric tons, and stories that have come out that have said that really they've had enough damage that they're really irretrievable in terms of the type of help that they get if they did suddenly get rains. Mm-hmm. But anyway, the lower crop down in Argentina pushing business and concern in the world market to U.S. shores. And the USDA responded in that March 8th report and jumped up the export numbers to, I think, 2.225 billion bushels. Had been about 2.0, I believe, or 2.025. Prior to that, it's 175 million bushels higher that they jumped at in one shot. And Eric, you and I were talking at that time how, the pace of shipments was about 40 million bushels or 35, 40, and didn't justify at that time really the pace we'd have to meet this new projection, which is about 57 or 55. Well, within the last week, we just got to 55 and 56 in terms of U.S. corn export shipments. So it bodes well for U.S. demand pull for grains out of stockpiles in the country for exports to match what's already happening for strong ethanol usage, wet corn milling usage, and at least a decent livestock feed usage. So you got supply problems in South America leading to demand pull issues here in the U.S. and giving us these type of price rises.
Well, you've had a few days to digest what the USDA said in the latest corn supply and demand report last week, plus all of the other factors that have been at play. And you've come up with, Dan, your latest projection on price for new crop for the marketing year 18-19, and looking at it from two scenarios, one being a lower per acre yield, one being a higher per acre yield.
Yes, of course, the USDA in their February 23rd outlook session, where they talked about their grain and oilseed market outlook for crops, came up with their projection. And that projection, of course, was pretty conservative, but also had the assumption of the carryover stocks we were thinking we'd have carry over from old crop into this new crop year out of the February report. Well, since then, with the jump up now we've seen in export business expectations, those beginning stocks are getting whittled down, 150, 200 million bushels. So with now the lower beginning stocks figure, you run that through the same balance sheet, and you're getting U.S. corn ending stocks projections, even with the USDA numbers that they had basically about 2 billion, 50 million bushels. So you're getting at that kind of, I wouldn't say it's the magic 2 billion bushel ending stocks figure, but that's a pretty important number. So you run that through, and the USDA's projection originally was 340. Well, with us having lower ending stocks of about, projected to be about 2.05 billion bushels, stocks to use about 14% instead of this 15, 16 we were talking about a while ago. You'd be able to justify raising the price that they projected a little bit, say to 345. First scenario I think to look at is that of having the same type of a tremendous corn production year as in 2018 as we had 2017, plugging in the same yield. In that situation, you end up with, instead of this 14.4 billion bushel crop that USDA was projecting, it's 14.6 billion bushels. Run that through about the same supply-demand balance sheets with a few minor adjustments. You end up with about just a little under 2.2 billion bushels, just under a 15% stock to use. And really, in that situation, we're right back during the winter or fall months to where we've been last October, November, December, about 330, 325, 340 prices, something like that. Really no change. But really, the other scenario that's out there would be to combine this relatively strong demand with any risk to the crop. If you just plug in what at one time was a record high yield of 164, 165 bushels per acre, I think that was back in about 2008, 2009. Plug that in, you get something like 13.6 billion bushels. Run that through the supply and demand balance sheet, and voila, you're sitting at 1.5 billion bushel ending stocks to use basically 10%. Price is closer to 420. So everybody knows, I think, that scenario is out there, but what's the probability of it? There's probably about a 1 in 4 chance that we have some combination of strong demand and some threat to our crops to give us higher prices. And really, 420 isn't that high of a price compared to what we've had in the past. Mm-hmm. But that's 164 bushels. We've had 158, 124 in our last 20, 30 years, but that's not even accounting for that. That's just 164, 165, and 13.5, 13.6 billion bushels. So we're sitting here now, mid-March, thinking about what the possibilities are going forward. And I don't doubt that the futures and traders in the futures are aware that possibility is out there, but who runs ahead and starts to bid it? You probably don't start to make moves like that, make investments like that, positions in the futures, until you actually get the crop planted and start to see the stress actually show up. So with what we've just seen in the last several weeks in the corn market, now the markets will be more reactive to any weather threats that would come out there in April and May, and probably give us better pricing opportunities.
All right. Right. And we do want to refer quickly here to the other item that you posted this week on agmanager.info. You took Kansas Farm Management Association data, specifically on the grain sorghum production enterprise. And you've looked over several years' time in the recent past to get a handle on the profitability of grain sorghum production. What do you have here?
Well, the allegation against U.S. grain sorghum producers would be that over time they produce this crop at a loss and that they're, quote, dumping their crop onto world markets. Of course, that's the allegation anybody makes against another country when they have a trade dispute. So we went back and looked at our Kansas Farm Management Association non-irrigated grain sorghum profitability estimates from 2008 through 2016, the last full year that we've got in terms of a set of numbers, and found that over that time frame, really we made money every year, some more, some less, in terms of a net return to management. That's covering all costs, including land, including labor, and then if you have anything extra, you'd call, quote, profit. We covered full costs 2008 through 2014 with no problem. Positive nets, and some of those years were close, but we covered that. Really, the only years where we'd see something lower than that would have been 14, 15, and 16 because of various reasons. In terms of net return to labor and management, basically the only year we haven't covered labor, that we haven't had a net return to labor and management was of any appreciable degree, was in 2016. So if the key issue that's being asked is whether we produce grain sorghum at a loss, gosh, it looks like from 2008 through 2016 on average, we've made money on grain sorghum. And in terms of a percent of gross revenue over time, I guess it's a good, economically well-behaving enterprise, and we make just enough for grain sorghum and probably for corn or any of these enterprises that we keep doing it. So the allegation against grain sorghum in the Central Plains that we produce at a loss really just doesn't hold up over time.
The evidence is right there in the numbers, which, again, producers, you can look at for yourself at agmanager.info, agmanager.info out of K-State, Agricultural Economics. And Dan, thanks for the thoughts and the input right here, as always. We'll touch base next Friday once more.
Thanks, Eric. Take care.
That's our weekly segment on the grain market trends from K-State Research and Extension. Grain market economist Dan O'Brien, and you're tuned to Agriculture Today.
Did you eat today? Thank a farmer. A way to get more involved in agriculture is through 4-H and FFA. Through 4-H and FFA, we have been given multiple opportunities to grow as leaders and learn more about agriculture.
You can learn skills related to jobs, public speaking skills, and you get the opportunity to travel around the country and meet new people.
If you want more information about getting more involved in 4-H and FFA, visit them on their websites at kansasffa.org and kansas4h.org.
This is Agriculture Today, and welcome back. Well, questions are starting to arise about potential insect activity in wheat and alfalfa, and our guest has been on the fielding end of those questions lately. Jeff Whitworth returns once more, crop entomologist, K-State Research and Extension. In just a few moments, Jeff, we're going to inform our alfalfa growers about a handy informational tool that they can use to actually help with their field scouting. More on that in a second, but let's pick up on wheat. And this crop has its troubles already with the droughty conditions, and there may be a few pests out there to pile on, so to say.
Yes, you're exactly right, Eric. I've been out and about in wheat fields and alfalfa fields in the last week, and the reason why is because that's the only potentially growing crops that we have this time of year. And I have gotten several questions, especially on wheat. You know, in some places the wheat looks like it's taking off, looks like it's growing a little bit, coming out of dormancy. In some places it hasn't, and so that always brings the question, are there winter grain mites or wheat curl mites or Hessian flies, or just what is causing the problem for the wheat not to start greening up as well as everybody wants it to this time of year? Mm-hmm. And really and truly, we probably went through 5 or 6 counties in the last couple of days and stopped at a lot of wheat fields. And we were looking for basically winter grain mites, because those are the ones of the problems this time of year, and wheat curl mites, because the wheat curl mite last year in the spring, it moved a lot further east than we had usually anticipated it doing. In 2017, the last part of 2017, we actually found wheat curl mites clear up into Dickinson County. And normally they're in about the western one-third of the state, but they're moving east. The problem with these mites, number one, the wheat curl mite, it can transmit or vector wheat streak mosaics, some viruses that can cause diseases.
As we were reminded vividly.
Yes, we had real problems with it. So we've kind of started sampling at least along the eastern border of where it ended up last spring and last fall. And so a lot of the growers are wondering if they had it in their fields and what that effect is going to be this year in the wheat. And it's really too early to tell. Until that wheat starts breaking dormancy and starts growing, you really can't tell what's going on out there. And so that's kind of what we've been finding. But the problem with the winter grain mite is every year, at least in the late fall or the early spring, late winter, whatever you want to call it, these little mites are active because they're winter grain mites. They're more active in cool weather. And what they do is they get into each individual cell of the plant and suck the juice out of the cells, so it can actually exacerbate stress caused by drought. And so we're seeing stress caused by drought around as the plants start to break dormancy. And so if we do have winter grain mite problems, that can be a real problem. I really do not recommend treating for winter grain mites, especially this year, and at least until we do get some rain or until this wheat does break dormancy for sure and we get some moisture and it starts growing. Because right now, from what we've seen at least the last couple of days, most of the yellowing of the wheat, it just hasn't broken dormancy yet, or it's not growing because of moisture. It's really not. We just didn't find any winter grain mites or wheat curl mites, and that could be that they're still in the soil. I think things are about to change, but it's still been getting pretty cold at night. And when we get down into the 20s at night and up into the 70s during the day, that still keeps things pretty well in hibernation or in dormancy for a while. I think it's going to change, but, when it does get up into the 70s during the day for a couple of days, everybody gets anxious and wants to get out and look. And that's not a bad thing. That's good. But in the last couple of days, we've really not seen any winter grain mite, wheat curl mite, or Hessian fly activity. We had some Hessian fly fields last fall that were decimated with Hessian fly, and so we're kind of wondering if some of that wheat's going to retiller in different places this fall. But again, until it starts growing pretty good, it's really tough to tell if it's a drought problem or if it's a arthropod, Hessian fly, wheat curl mite, or winter grain mite problem.
What about the cutworm, though? Is that a different issue?
Yes, that's a great question. The army cutworm is the worm that can be out there right now. The difference is it's going to feed on the vegetation. So when the mites will actually go through and get the juice out of each individual cell, so you'll get kind of a yellowy or silvery looking plant. If it's an army cutworm feeding on it, the vegetation will disappear. So if you're starting to see usually kind of a round spot or something like that in a field where the vegetation's going, so you're starting to see bare earth, get out and look right don't look in the middle of that. Look along the border where there's still some vegetation. Dig around in the soil, and you'll probably find little worms. I have had one call this year about army cutworms, and I've had guys call about birds feeding out in alfalfa and wheat fields, because when that moth laid eggs last year, they'll lay eggs in whatever is growing. And in Kansas, the only thing we have growing in the fall, for the most part, agriculturally at least, is alfalfa or wheat. So the eggs can be laid in either of those crops. Generally, it's wheat that affects more because alfalfa, it's usually established and the worms feeding on it is not noticed. But if you have blackbirds or seagulls out feeding in a field, stop and go out and look. A couple of guys have told me they've noticed that. They just hadn't taken the time to go out and look just because it's been too dry yet, and they really haven't worried about their wheat crop like they normally do this time of year.
So if one does find cutworms are getting after it, is that warranting treatment at all?
Again, I would hold off and wait and see what happens. If we get good growing conditions, most of the time the wheat can outgrow it. But, yeah, if they're pretty good infestation and you don't have birds helping, because birds will really help, you might have to go out and put a spot treatment with one of the registered insecticides that are registered for army cutworms. Hopefully that won't be the case. Hopefully we'll get some good growing conditions, and this wheat and the alfalfa can outgrow all of these pests, but we'll just have to kind of wait and see.
And to alfalfa and the weevil. So any signs of it picking up activity?
Yes, it seems to be kind of the same. Now, alfalfa is a little different because in well-established fields, it's got a pretty good, well-established root system that goes down, and there's still some moisture down in there. But from what we've seen the last few days, it still really is not growing good either. Still is kind of on the borderline of starting to grow. There's a few buds here and a few buds there. But primarily what we were looking for was alfalfa weevil feeding damage. And there's a new tool that's available it's called the Mesonet. It's really easy to use. Even I can use it. Maybe even you. I don't know. But anyway, you can just type in KSU or Kansas State University Mesonet, and it will pull it up, and then you can go from there with the menus that are provided. It'll tell you to go with alfalfa weevil or corn or whatever. In this case, we just put on the alfalfa weevil, and it pulls up the growing degree days or the thermal units. In this case, it's called growing degree days. Most growers are familiar with growing degree days because that's how you choose the length of corn or sorghum that you want to use. It's the same thought of how growing degree days are utilized for alfalfa weevils.
It's a predictor of alfalfa weevil activity then, right?
It is. It gives you the menu to type in the dates you're interested in looking for. And so what we've done, we've put together the predictor from January 1st to March 15th, 16th, April 1st, whatever date it is you're interested. And that will give you the number of growing degree days accumulated up to that point in time. It also shows you a map. So you can go to the map and you can click on the area with the closest weather station to where you're located. So I just, before I came over, I did Manhattan, and it clicked on the Manhattan growing degree days that we've accumulated since the 1st of January for the alfalfa weevil. And up to this point in time, we've had 203. And it shows you right there what that means for alfalfa weevil eggs. We start looking for eggs to hatch between 150 and 180 growing degree days, but you're not going to see pinholing or a little bit of leaf feeding until we get to about 300. Now, that sounds like quite a lag of growing degree days, but when it's 70 degrees and 50 degrees, you can accumulate these things at 15 to 20 per day. So within a week's period of time, you can have eggs hatching and pinhole feeding out in the alfalfa.
So that reading might suggest that a producer should be scouting in this particular example.
Yes, and you got to realize these growing degree days, they can change quite a bit depending upon the elevation of your field. In an area where it's a little warmer, you can vary by 3 or 4 days quite easily. So these weather stations are just closest to your area. So get out and actually, that's why we put 150 to 180 growing degree days. When you start looking for those eggs will start hatching, whether there's enough to find pinhole feeding or not. I think it's really a neat tool just to let you stay at home and type in KSU Mesonet, the area you're interested in, and tell you kind of what the alfalfa weevils are doing in your area without actually having to get out. And once you decided, the eggs are hatching in my area and I'm going to have some pinhole feeding, you might want to get out and see what the infestation level looks like. And then you get out and start following that weekly. You'll have an idea if you're going to have to treat or not.
Yeah. Well, this is a very new addition to the suite of information that can be found at this website, which is, of course, maintained by the Weather Data Library here at the university, mesonet.k-state.edu, mesonet.k-state.edu. We appreciate the time, as always, Jeff. Thanks for coming over.
Yes, my pleasure. Thank you very much.
That's an update from crop entomologist Jeff Whitworth of K-State Research and Extension on expectations for insect activity in wheat and alfalfa around Kansas. And you're listening to Agriculture Today.
While many people know hunger is an issue in developing countries, it is also a problem in our own backyards. In 2010, 1 in 7 Kansans struggled to put adequate food on the table. 2 K-State Research and Extension programs are tackling this problem. The Family Nutrition Program and Expanded Food and Nutrition Education Program reach thousands of Kansans in more than 70 counties. They learn how to eat healthy with a low budget. For more information about these programs, visit ksre.ksu.edu.
We're back now on this Agriculture Today, and at long last is moisture relief in the offing for a good share of Kansas. We'll find out what Mary Knapp thinks about that according to the latest data she's gathered. As you know, she's a research and extension climatologist at K-State. First, Mary, there was a touch of rainfall last night on the extremes of either end of Kansas.
Right. We did get a split decision, if you will, on the rainfall pattern. From Riley County eastward, we saw some moisture. 0.16 of an inch was the most reported so far, and we don't have all of the reports in yet. But again, 0.16 of an inch at Ashland Bottoms. That mirrors the 0.16 of an inch that was reported at Tribune. And you have to basically go from Riley County to Tribune to actually see anything on the map as far as moisture.
There was nothing in between.
Nothing in between.
Wow.
And again, 0.16, while we certainly will take it, isn't going to go very far in alleviating any of the dryness that we're currently experiencing. This could easily be blown away by the strong winds that were expected in the next 24 hours, and you wouldn't even know that it had rained. And in fact, out in western Kansas, while they do have a chance of moisture for today, they are calling for blowing dust by the evening. And again, that indicates just how dry conditions are and how little this is going to do to relieve those conditions.
And to add to it, the latest drought monitor would say that as of midweek this week, again, intensifying dryness?
Yes, we did see an intensification, an expansion of the extreme drought. We have not had a big expansion of the exceptional drought, but again, there's plenty of time for that to creep further north, depending upon how conditions develop in the next couple of weeks or into April. But expansion of the extreme drought and an expansion of the severe drought into northeastern Kansas. There was no contraction, if you will, in any way, shape, or form. We do still have that tiny sliver of drought-free up in extreme northwestern Kansas in Cheyenne County, and not even the entire county of Cheyenne, but it's still there, lingering, and we can hope that the rainfall pattern improves as we move into our springtime and we can erode some of those drier conditions.
Well, right to that then, and there is potential for some more than just modest relief coming up here in the next few days. And you've been looking at the quantity prediction on that. What is it saying to us, Mary?
Well, if we look at the quantitative precip forecast, which is issued by NOAA every day, this one, it looks at how much moisture will occur in the next week, going through next Friday, the 23rd. And the encouraging news is not only are they calling for moisture, they are calling for some substantial amounts. And we're looking at from northwest Kansas across the northern tier, seeing anywhere from 1 inch to 1.25 inches, which again would be very, very welcome. It isn't going to make huge inroads on the drought situation, but it certainly will be a change in pattern that would be welcome. And that moisture actually extends down through parts of the most severely affected in central and south central, where they are expected to see 3/4 of an inch to maybe 1.25 inches again. And while, again, that isn't huge amounts, it's a step in the right direction. Again, the amounts drop off as you get closer to the Oklahoma border, but the only area that is not expecting anything more than a trace is that extreme southwestern corner. Morton County, basically, Elkhart might miss out on getting anything, but this is a much more favorable map than we've seen for a very long time.
And this is going to begin, late weekend into Monday, likely?
It looks like there's going to be 2 rounds of it, late weekend and then maybe another round through the midweek. By the end of next week, it looks for a drier pattern to set up for at least a couple of days. So that's the take on the models right now. Of course, those can change at any time, but again, a much more encouraging pattern in the next week. And indeed, when we look at the April forecast, which was released yesterday, that is encouraging in the fact that it's actually neutral on both temperature and precip. Not super encouraging because it isn't trending towards wetter than normal for April, but it at least is not having that thumb on the scale for the dry side. And the temperatures are expected to be close to normal, not excessively warm or excessively cool. Overall, the question is, how is that split? We've been on a roller coaster all winter long. Do we have a warm start and a cold end, or vice versa? But at least the overall pattern for the month is expected to be close to normal.
Very good. And briefly on temperatures for next week, are we past the sub-freezing lows now or not?
Not really, but again, keep in mind that if we do have a more humid air mass, which would be indicated by actually getting some moisture to the ground, temperatures tend not to have quite the roller coaster quality. They don't warm up as much and they don't cool down as much.
And we'll finish up reminding folks about resources available to them from K-State. Earlier in the broadcast, we noted that on the Mesonet website, there is this new alfalfa weevil tracking tool that producers can use. Jeff Whitworth told us all about that, but there's much, much more there, including the latest on growing degree days that you would encourage producers to fully utilize as well, Mary.
Right. The growing degree days will be on that same page with the alfalfa tracker. One thing that producers will be interested in as they look at planting times, as we're approaching that, the soil temperature map has a charting feature where you can not only see what the average temperatures are, you can look at them over the week's time and see how they're changing or varying. So whether you're at a steady 55 degrees or if you're bouncing between 60 and 30 on that 2-inch soil temperature, you can track that and see how that's behaving. The other thing that will be up there is on our climate page, we do a weekly drought update, and you can find that with the latest information, and we include the quantitative precip map and others so that you can get a snapshot of what's currently happening with the drought.
That website is rich with information, mesonet.ksu.edu. Mary, have a good weekend, and many thanks.
Thanks, Eric.
Mary Knapp, Research and Extension Climatologist here at K-State. Thanks to you likewise for being along with us, and do enjoy your weekend as well. Eric Atkinson here. This has been Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network.